Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly. By the time I post this, it is after Christmas and New Year, so I hope all of you had a wonderful holiday, and I just want to reiterate how thankful I am to have had such a wonderful year with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to 2023. I don't have much to preface with today. If you want to follow my socials, I do have a Twitter and Instagram that you can follow for more daily updates, and with that, let's just get right into the video. On April 26, 1989, the deadliest twister in recorded world history would move through the Maniganj district in Bangladesh, taking over 1,300 lives and leaving over 80,000 homeless. It's difficult to fathom, let alone express, the gravity of a tornado event of this magnitude. So today, we're going to take a look at the meteorological circumstances, the context, and the aftermath of what would become the deadliest twister in recorded history. Despite public perception, tornadoes have long wreaked havoc through Bangladesh, yet the long history of tragic and violent twisters have often gone unnoticed by the rest of the world. Bangladesh is a small country located in southern Asia, just east of India. Bangladesh, also known as the Land of Rivers, resides in the center of the fertile Ganges Delta. Bangladesh is not only characterized by its many rivers, the country's climate is notable for its tropical monsoon season, which make it prone to floods and tropical cyclones. And while those are the main and certainly most studied natural disasters in the country, Bangladesh is also the center of one of the world's most prevalent tornado alleys. And while tornado alleys across the world all have their own individual characteristics that make them unique, there's something different about this one. The tornado alley that's sprawled across Bangladesh is characterized by a short yet incredibly volatile period for these tornadoes to happen during the pre- and post-monsoon seasons. Part of this is due to the increased low-level flow from the Bay of Bengal during this period of time, allowing for increased amounts of atmospheric energy or CAPE in the area. Another major contributing factor is the high-level jet streak. Between March and April, the mid and upper level flows are fairly strong. The result of these major contributing factors is a period in time between March and April that's essentially mega conducive to severe weather in Bangladesh. A short period of time in which some of the world's deadliest tornadoes in recorded history have occurred. The history of violent tornadoes in Bangladesh is both shocking and notably undiscussed. This dates back to as early as 1838, the region's first recorded tornado. In the 20th century, multiple violent tornadoes individually took hundreds of lives, multiple tornadoes with fatality counts that exceeded the United States' highest fatality counts. What I initially thought was by far the world's deadliest tornado, the one we're going to talk about today, quickly became one of many. 1989. It's been 18 years since Bangladesh gained its independence from India in 1971. The country was just a few short years away from a major economic boom, and while the future was looking bright for those who lived in the big city, the majority of the country still lived in poverty. Rural areas were dependent upon agriculture, which means any natural disasters like typhoons, floods, severe weather, or droughts would seriously impact the rural community's ability to make a living and to survive. By April, the country had been in a months-long drought. Not only had most of the rivers in northwest Bangladesh dried up, limiting the drinking water supply, but dust storms would also become problematic in the surrounding regions. The drought ultimately affected 5 million in the country in the spring of 1989, crippling the flow of life and business. Everything is really aligned for even more of a tragedy to unfold. On April 25, 1989, an area of low pressure is residing over West Bengal in India, remaining mostly stationary. Cooler, drier air from the Himalayan mountains begins to drop south over the northwestern portion of the country. At the same time, warm, moist air from the Bay of Bengal begins to rise. Winds are ripping from the jet stream. The large vertical wind shear provided strong ventilation effect, which is very favorable for tornadoes. By the next day, April 26th, a secondary low-pressure system located over Nepal begins to approach. The pressure gradient across Bangladesh becomes much more intense. The temperature gradient is now forming an intense dry line over western Bangladesh and will ultimately serve as the point of initiation for storms. Things are rapidly coming together for an incredibly volatile atmosphere conducive to tornadoes over Bangladesh on April 26th, and because there is no tornado forecasting, nobody has a clue. April 26, 1989. In the early morning hours, the residents of the Manikanj district of central Bangladesh are just starting their day. The favorable atmospheric setup is centered over the central portions of the country by early morning hours. And as the sun shines over the Manikanj district, the diurnal heating begins to bring more atmospheric energy or cape in place for storms to begin feeding off of. In just a few short hours, the dry line progressing towards the central portion of the country will serve as the initiation point for storms. And finally, at 6 p.m. local time, unbeknownst to the residents, a supercell storm begins to form. And without tornado watches or warnings, this is only going to make the situation much more catastrophic. And finally, sometime around 6:30 p.m. local time, what would become the deadliest twister in recorded history touches down, and what would occur over the next hour was nothing short of horrific. The areas the twister immediately begins impacting are rural. We're talking about bamboo, wood, and mud homes with tin roofs like we discussed. The twister is moving east at this point without TV or radio warnings or any kind of outdoor sirens, and those east of the path have no idea what's coming. Trees are immediately being uprooted. Any structures that are in the path of this twister without any good anchoring or anchoring at all in many cases are just shredded or simply blown away. Now, for the first time, the twister crosses over the Daulatpur River and now is moving directly towards the more populated areas of Saturia. Saturia is not only the most populated region that the twister moves through in its life, but it's also likely the most intense point of the twister's life. It's been said that every home within a 6-kilometer radius was flattened or simply gone. A few short minutes after passing through Saturia, the twister moves north and finally dissipates. In total, the twister tracks almost 50 miles from the Daulatpur regions to the north of Saturia, carving an almost mile-wide path through the entirety. A 58 square mile area through Saturia is the hardest hit region. In the immediate aftermath of the tornado, it's abundantly clear how violent it was and how horrific the damage was. Oftentimes, the entire home would be gone, the entire family would be gone, and in some areas, the entire village was gone. An article in the Bangladesh Observer stated, quote, "The devastation was so complete that, barring some skeletons of trees, there were no signs of standing infrastructure." One of the many tragic realities of this particular tornado event wasn't just the initial trauma of the tornado itself. In the coming hours after the twister lifts and people are beginning to understand what's just happened, it's becoming increasingly apparent that nowhere near enough medical and emergency assistance was available, nor adequate transportation to get injured people the help that they desperately needed. With a disaster of this magnitude where hundreds of people have just lost their lives, it's hard to know how well any system could handle something like this, but particularly Bangladesh, this was just not the time or place where it could be adequately handled at all. Tragically, in the week after the disaster in the Manikanj district, over 1,000 people were already confirmed to have lost their lives and some 12,000 were injured. We're going to spend a minute talking about the fatalities and injuries because to me it's one of the most important and prevalent parts of this event and any event that really need to be talked about more in depth. And the story today is so critical because this is 1,300 plus people who lost their lives in a very tragic and awful way. And in my personal opinion, anytime I've really seen this event covered, it is always an incredibly compacted and really short overview based on the statistics and the fact that this is the deadliest tornado in the world, and it's never really elaborated on in any way. And I think for me personally, I just want to do it a little more justice, to elaborate and give a little more context to 1,300 fatalities. So we're going to talk about the loss of life and injury, we're going to give a little bit more context to them, and we're going to discuss what makes tornadoes in Bangladesh so deadly. Okay, 1,300 fatalities, and I want to reiterate that that is the best estimate. It is very likely that those numbers are higher. To put that number into perspective, the highest known fatality count of a twister in the United States is from the tri-state tornado, where 695, possibly more, lost their lives. And I wish I could say that the Saturia tornado in Bangladesh from 1989 was unprecedented, but unfortunately, I can't. The fact is that there have been multiple events in Bangladesh throughout the 20th century that took 500 plus lives. On top of 1,300 fatalities, there were 12,000 injuries. As a reminder, those are not just cuts and bruises. These are people who had broken bones or compound fractures, severed limbs, broken backs, gashes that leave permanent scars, crippling, debilitating, lifelong injuries. And that's thousands of people who potentially can never hold the same job again, and some of those undoubtedly were never able to really work again after those injuries. All of this is just the physical injury. We haven't even talked about the mental trauma that's suffered from the event itself. Many of these people are people who are going to have nightmares and flashbacks for the rest of their lives, who every time they smell a certain smell or every time they hear glass break, they might get flashed back to that day, that trauma. I never intend to make these videos hard to listen to. I never intend to make them graphic in any way, shape, or form. But I also cannot talk about 1,300 people losing their lives and 12,000 people who were injured in some kind of way without really trying to give a shred of reality. So with all of those things in mind, let's take a look at why the tornadoes are so deadly in Bangladesh. We briefly discussed earlier some of the factors that make tornadoes in Bangladesh so deadly, but we're going to look at them a little bit more in depth. The first factor being population density. The Manikanj district in Bangladesh in 1989 had a population of over 1 million people, so it's not hard to understand why an event like this would lead to a higher fatality count. The second reason, and one of the biggest factors, is poor construction. When you have homes that are made of mud bricks and wood and tin roofs and bamboo, it's not hard to understand how even a lower echelon tornado would cause incredible damage to them. You can see how that would lead to higher fatalities. You can also see in some of the clips where there are a few buildings that are left standing, which seem to me to be made of some kind of concrete. So I think it's self-explanatory. The third main contributing factor are the mitigation efforts, or lack thereof. Bangladesh at the time, and largely still today, takes part in no preparedness programs, no tornado forecasting, no warning system, little to no public education about severe weather and tornadoes. And to underscore how important mitigation efforts are, the year after the United States started implementing tornado warning sirens, the fatality count in the United States annually was cut in half. The fourth contributing factor that we saw today in this instance was a lack of immediate medical access, resources, and transportation after a tornado. It was clear that whether it be due to a lack of medical professionals available, there had to be some kind of combination of those factors that led to people really just sitting and not getting medical attention. I don't know what it was, there is no information on that, but it's clear that the system was not able to handle injuries to that extent. The fifth and final problem we're going to discuss, and one that I find to be the most interesting, is the fatalistic approach to nature in Bangladesh. Fatalism and religion. Fatalism, known as the propensity to believe that one's destiny is externally determined, means that certain cultures and individuals believe that they have a predetermined fate, one that could include a fate or death by natural disaster. Bangladesh does have a large religious population, many of which believe in fatalism through their religion, and this is a universal concept, by the way. It's not even confined to religion. It's actually really the same concept as when you hear someone in, let's say, North America, for example. They might say something along the lines of, if it's my time to go, then I'll go, or if God is calling me home, then that's God's plan for me. And it is actually a pretty prevalent factor in storm fatalities. All of these reasons for higher fatality counts aren't just my opinion. These are things that have actually been studied for years. Emergency and disaster management study these factors all the time. And to summarize my personal thoughts on all of these points, it's really the insecurity of both the systems in place in other countries, the infrastructure that's in place, the meteorological systems that are in place, that lead to people being significantly more vulnerable in an even weak tornado like an EF2 or an EF3. And it's a huge problem. In total, an estimated 1,300 people lost their lives in this tornado. 12,000 were injured, and over 80,000 people were left without a home. 1.5 million was the rough dollar estimate of damage that occurred in the area. And it's not just the homes that are destroyed and the lives. Obviously, we're also talking about really essential parts of the economic growth, businesses, livestock that are critical for families, crops that were already scarce in the area after the drought were destroyed. And it's really difficult to fully convey just how economically devastating that is for this region. We're going to take a second to talk about rating. A World Meteorological Association rated this tornado as an F3.5 on the Fujita scale. Now, of course, I do not know where the 0.5 came from. It's possible it was rated using an international system that isn't in use anymore. But interestingly, even at the time when the original Fujita scale was in use, the wind speed estimation for this tornado between 210 and 260 miles per hour would have made it an F4 on those standards. And if you watch a lot of my videos, you know that I usually never question ratings. And that's because the National Weather Service here is full of brilliant engineers, and I don't like to question their work. I'm not a wind engineer, nor am I the one that's there in person. But today I'm going to go a little off the rails, not only because the storm wasn't surveyed by the National Weather Service, I don't know who surveyed it, or if there really was an official team on the ground immediately after. And I have to say I'm a little disappointed with the rating, that this was what they came up with. I really just wish there was more information out there so I could maybe understand why they gave it this rating. And ultimately the rating doesn't matter, the damage was still the same, but I just think it's interesting that for such a violent and catastrophic twister, an F3.5 was the only rating that it ever got. We're used to discussing the cleanup and recovery process on this channel from the perspective of the United States, where we have FEMA and the American Red Cross. We have local and state and government aid programs all available to assist us when something like this happens. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about Bangladesh in 1989. We're talking about 80,000 people that do not have a place to sleep at night. And frankly, what does anyone do with 80,000 displaced people in one district? That's an enormous amount. And what's really frustrating is that there's little to really no information about the recovery process or what programs might have been available at the time in Manikanj district in 1989 for those people to recover. And I'm frankly inclined to believe that there wasn't much. As I tried to dig up information on the recovery, I stumbled across an article written shortly after the disaster that promised international aid, which was coming to help build temporary shelter and to provide resources. I was never able to find much of a follow-up. But it was unquestionable that even with aid, thousands of people would still have to wait months before getting any real help. As you can see in some of the clips, there are a few camps for support in the area, smaller medical camps, and a station to give out rice, which is great and a good start. However, in one interview, a survivor says that while they were thankful for the cup of rice given out, he said he honestly didn't even know what to do with it. Not only did he not have a kitchen to cook it in, he now didn't have cooking utensils or even bowls, as they had all been blown away in the storm. So ultimately, the people who were the victims really just had to come together and work things out themselves. It was going to be a long and incredibly painful process of recovery that wasn't even going to happen in the next 6 months or year. After the drought of 1989, the next 2 years in the country would be followed by extreme flooding, making the recovery even harder. The local economy was crippled. People have lost their businesses. People have lost their livelihood and their cattle. Many people are injured now to the point where they can't work. Some people still didn't have homes. And of course, each system around the world is going to take a much different approach to dealing with tornadoes than the United States. Understandably so. The United States has exponentially more tornadoes than the rest of the world. And it's really important that we add this into the context of how devastating this event was. We have to think about the fact that when there's a tornado in North America, there's a sense of help. You know that you're going to get some kind of assistance. You've got a support system from the local to the state, all the way up to the federal government. And most importantly, you have this promise of rebuilding something. But now imagine that not only have you lost your home, you've lost potentially your business and your livelihood. And on top of all of that, you may or may not have any help available to you. You may not have that promise of rebuilding something. So is the 1989 Saturia Daulatpur tornado the deadliest in world history? By technicality of records, yes. Is it one of the worst ever? Yes. Could there have been other events in the 20th century that have surpassed this event and the fatality count? I'm inclined to believe also yes. The more I read about tornadoes in Bangladesh over the years, the more I understood that the Daulatpur Saturia tornado wasn't necessarily a freak event. While this twister certainly is more anomalous in nature, there have been multiple other events that have been really close to this magnitude and will continue to happen in the future. Despite multiple events over the years with fatality counts in the hundreds, tornadoes continue to receive little attention from hazards researchers in Bangladesh. Today in Bangladesh, just over 60% of the population live in nearly 80,000 villages across the country, and the rest reside in 525 urban centers. The poverty rate now is well under 20% and continues to shrink. Housing conditions even in rural areas have significantly improved, and in fact, since the pandemic, Bangladesh is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The population in the district of Maniganj sits close to 2 million, and overall the country is in a much better place than it was 30 years ago, and it only continues to improve. It's incredible and fascinating how violent twisters of this magnitude can come from such a small area in southern Asia. What's even scarier, however, is that with a rapidly growing population density, with millions of citizens, an event like this is only bound to happen again. Without proper forecast or warning systems in place, it's hard to believe that anything other than tragedy will once again unfold. Honestly, after this event, we're left with more questions than we're left with answers, which is frustrating because usually in my videos I like to have a solid ending. I like to have a conclusion where we can leave off on a happy note or a note of rebuilding or something changing in a major way. We don't get the satisfaction of knowing that the community or meteorological technology or our understanding of tornadoes was bettered in any way. But I would like to try to leave off on a note of hope. There have been some smaller improvements in Bangladesh to meteorology since 1989. Like better radars, there have been better recovery systems in place. Economically, rural communities are much better equipped to deal with tragedy, and the country financially is in a better place to give aid when a disaster like this would happen. Perhaps it's only a matter of time before forecasting is implemented or some kind of outdoor sirens are put in place. I don't have all the answers. I just want to bring to light a situation that is really important, and I think that's all we can do. I think we can promote public education about severe weather and tornadoes, particularly in other countries where it's just really not talked about as much. One thing I do know, however, is that it's only a matter of time before another major tornado happens in Bangladesh. And not only in Bangladesh, but in the many other tornado-prone regions across the world. I have hope that we're getting closer to improvement. I know today has been a lot, it's been pretty heavy, and there's been a lot of information in this video, but I think this is a really important one. And I really hope you all got something from this one today. Overall, this honestly has been one of the more rewarding events that I've researched and talked about, and I really would like to focus a lot of my attention on tornadoes in other parts of the world. So yeah, I want to say thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for such a wonderful year of growth and just getting to know people. I'm so shocked and blown away still that people would take the time to tell me their own personal stories or their family stories about tornadoes, and I'm just really humbled and really grateful overall. And with that, Mr. Blaze, do you have anything to say? No. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow my Twitter or Instagram that I will have linked in the description. And with that, I think that's all I have, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching today, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.